35%. That's all the Israelis who support Trump's so-called deal of the century. The other 65% either don't care for the deal or are against it. Hi, I'm Mariam Azacher, and this is Inside Israel. Now, as Israel is amidst a third election after two failed ones, the so-called deal of the century has become a subject of internal debate. This has contributed to a political deadlock that Israelis just can't trust their politicians to solve.
The so-called deal of the century has become a subject of internal Israeli debate. In a joint survey, I-24 News and Israel Hayom found that only 35% are willing to adopt Trump's peace plan in entirety, with another 31% saying no and another 34% who said that they don't know. As shown in this latest poll, there is no consensus among Israelis, far from any, in fact. This is especially true when it comes to the actual implementation of the so-called deal of the century. Just recently, an Israeli cabinet meeting to approve annexation was cancelled. In Israel, every military and diplomatic-related development has a direct impact on the political status. The plan was far-fetched and with little chance of ever materializing, but it was important as an official document rewarding long-held Israeli right-wing position. To the Israeli right wing, annexing settlements, holding on to occupied East Jerusalem Al-Quds, and stripping a more than third of the occupied West Bank from any future Palestinian state is essential to their ideology and political policies. However, within weeks since the unveiling of the so-called deal of the century back on January 28, any political gains for Netanyahu had evaporated. In fact, the opposite unforeseen happened, and that was Palestinians, Muslims, Europeans, Arabs, and countries from across the world condemned the plan. Even the White House, which is under pressure from Congress, walked back its support of any immediate annexation of land in the West Bank until, at least after the Israeli elections, delivered a clear winner. But that's not stopping Israelis' allies in Washington. Tel Aviv and Washington have come up with a joint committee to examine and determine the post-annexation map of Israel. Netanyahu just promised voters that maps of Greater Israel were being drawn up, as he keeps annexation part of his political campaign.
As a part of the so-called deal of the century, Israel would be given the green light to annex occupied Palestinian lands. Now, according to a poll by I-24 News, at least 45% of Israelis oppose the annexation or don't support it at all. What does this signify? This next case study from Israel will answer that question and more.
I think that most Israelis are beginning to realize that what's called the deal of the century is not a realistic deal. I think that they now realize that it was a deal that reflects the interests of a specific political party in Israel. It represents the interest of the right wing in Israel and not the interests of Israel. They know that there is no Palestinian partner for that, and that this all was mainly a trick for the Likud to try to generate support among Israelis. I think they also know that they cannot take the land without people. On most of those lands there are Palestinian people, and they're not interested in having a large Palestinian population added to Israel, which will maybe change the demographic balance in the state of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has managed over the last 10 years to make Israeli politics more about him, about his own political survival. It's not only the last 1 year. Netanyahu has been able to cut the heads of any competitors within the Likud or competitors within opposing parties. He managed to almost destroy the Labour Party and to delegitimize any other alternative politician, including Benny Gantz. It's all about his personal survival. And in that, he did sacrifice the interests of the general population. I think he also sacrificed the interests of the state of Israel. He's damaged Israel's economic justice, and he's damaged the social fabric in Israeli society. Yes, it is about personal interests of Benjamin Netanyahu, and as long as Israel is stuck into this loop, Israel does not seem to have any other alternative future. Israelis, I don't think Israelis support the deal of the century. Israelis support the relationship with the United States. Israelis feel that the United States is a strong strategic partner. I think that Netanyahu tried to overplay the deal of the century, and the backfire was the feeling that Netanyahu is manipulating Israelis by that Netanyahu is manipulating Israelis with a deal that is not realistic. I mean, it didn't take much time for Israelis to understand that there is no Palestinian partner, there is no Arab partner. Netanyahu was saying that the Arab world is going to support this. There were only a couple of small Arab countries that expressed some basic support. The rest of the Arab world sided with the Palestinians and supported the Palestinian perspective. Clearly, yes. I mean, the chances of the Likud improved after the clearly, yes, the chances of the Likud improved dramatically after the publication of the Trump deal of the century. And this also showed in the results of the elections. The right wing in Israel improved their seats by 3 seats in the parliament. They increased from 55 to 58 seats. Mainly, he managed to increase the turnout rate among the settlers and the base of the right wing in Israel. And he managed to show that he has a very strong foundation and strong relationship with the Trump administration, giving Israel the best aspirations that the right wing has. So it did talk to his political base. It did not talk to maybe the majority of Israelis, because the majority of Israelis still voted against Benjamin Netanyahu. But it improved his political base, which is close to a tie in Israel. So 61 versus 58 for Netanyahu is better than the 65 versus 55, which was the results of the September elections.
Alec Maurer, the editor-in-chief of the Israeli website Megaphone News, is here to give us more information on the topic. Great to have you with us, Mr. Maurer. Now, here's my first question. What is it about the so-called deal of the century that's made it rejected even in Israel?
Right. The answer is very simple. After the deal that the great celebrations at Washington, when Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu declare about this deal of the century, they put Mr. Gantz in the position that he wouldn't want to refuse it, because then he couldn't make the right side of the right voter, the voter of the right side, to move to his party. So that is why Mr. Gantz more or less agreed to that, but he added that the deal of the century can work out just when we are talking with a deal with Palestinian Authority, meaning that we have to talk to them, meaning that he knows that they won't agree to that. So this is a little extra that he moved to it, he put on it. But he had to agree with it, because if he didn't agree with it in front of the camera, he lose voters. This is why he voted for that. Mr. Netanyahu, can you say, Mr. Netanyahu knew and knows that it can't work. But he made it especially for the elections. And Mr. Trump really help him. Really help him in a lot of things.
So the plan was so politicized it has reflected on the divisions between the society and politicians. Why are people so upset?
In Israel, we have the economy in Israel stopped working because of the election. I mean, it's still working, of course. We don't have strikes, but the economy is getting bad. Business is going bad because you see, the budget, the Israeli budget, the government Israeli budget, if you don't vote for it, so the law said that if there's no government, the law said that you have to split for 12 the old budgets. I mean, we have to split them for 12 months. You can't make it wider and you can make it smaller, and you can't fix it to the needs of today. So you only have to do is to take the old budget, Israeli budget, split it to 12, and then try to do it again, try to work with it. So the local authorities are really getting hard to deal with it because they are short of money. So it is impacted by everybody else. And then programs, you can't move programs, you can't do anything with the programs because you don't have any government to make a decision. You don't have any government to make the rules. So it's really the confusion. We never had in Israel such an elections. We never had them. It's the first time that in 1 year we are going for the same time for the elections. So the society here in Israel, it's becoming right now between the left flag to the right flag of the Israeli parties, and but most of the people know that we can't make ourselves going to the first elections, which is gonna be. It really seems it's gonna be. We are not sure if we're afraid, but it seems today that it's gonna be at the first elections. So the economy will break down, and the society will move just like that, getting weak of it. They get tired of it.
Well, the realities on the ground have overshadowed the deal of the century and the push for it by the Israeli regime. Now, why is the regime in Tel Aviv pushing the so-called deal of the century on citizens?
The problem is that, as I told you, that the prime minister is fighting for his life. This really is his life fight. And he dragged Israel for the first elections. We didn't want the elections. And then he dragged them again to the second elections. And then he dragged them again to the third elections. We're going to have the third elections next week, Monday. So everything is just everybody is waiting for these elections, but it seems today that he's really nearly to get 61 votes of the member of the Knesset. If he succeed to get it, I don't know. I don't want to think about it if it will happen. But if it will happen, I think it's going to be a dictator in Israel. The democracy in Israel is going to collapse. So these elections is very, very important to the democracies in Israel. It's very important to the people in Israel, to the economy in Israel. And we're going to see it next Monday.
Well, thanks for that, Mr. Maurer. That was Alec Maurer, the editor-in-chief of the Israeli Megaphone news website from Tel Aviv. There's still a lot more to discuss on this topic, so don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Here's what the Israelis are divided over. The deal of the century in general is annexation of Palestinian lands and how the regime is coercing Israelis into accepting the deal. As Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu faces trial over corruption charges, and while the main opponent Benny Gantz is expected to hold the same favorable policies over the so-called deal of the century, Israelis believe that a fourth round of elections is likely. Israel's Central Elections Committee set a date for a fourth election just in case this latest third election doesn't work out.
Israel's Central Elections Committee has set the date for the fourth Israeli consecutive election on September 8th, in case the political stalemate won't change on March 2nd. Even then, Central Elections Committee seems to be skeptical about the current state of politics in Israel. In fact, most Israelis believe that the political logjam will still grip Israel in the wake of the March 2nd general election. Some 40% of respondents believe that a fourth election is highly likely, and 34% said it was likely. The core of this uncertainty and no confidence in Israeli politics comes from the fact that the right-wing Likud party, which has been in power for over 10 years now, just doesn't want to step aside. Netanyahu pounced on the so-called deal of the century as an opportunity to polish his credentials as the man who could coax a U.S. president into offering up the plan. He thought the so-called deal would give his right-wing base the one thing the international community has largely denied them, that is, recognition of Israel's settlements. Under international law, all of Israel's settlements in the occupied West Bank are illegal. Netanyahu needed this more than ever. After all, he is the first sitting prime minister to be indicted while still in office, which is a big blow to his tenure and could ultimately cost him his premiership. He is now fighting for his freedom. Furthermore, Israel's opposition led by Benny Gantz is also in crisis, as Gantz has shown similar policies to the right wing, including recognizing the so-called deal of the century. He himself, along with Netanyahu, is also part of an investigation by the International Criminal Court for war crimes against the Palestinians.
Mr. Gilad Atzmon, Israeli-born British novelist, political activist, and writer, will join us for this next interview. Welcome to the show, Mr. Atzmon. Now, first off, does it surprise you at all that the majority of Israelis are not for the so-called deal of the century?
Yeah, it is not very surprising. The Israelis never been too excited about the so-called two states solutions. What they really want is two Jewish states solution, and they're not so sure that this is exactly what Trump delivers. But I'm actually pretty convinced that this is what Kushner had in mind.
Well, the so-called deal of the century, it practically authorizes Israelis to continue its persecution of Palestinians. Are Israelis aware that this is Palestinian land being betted on?
The Israelis are aware of the troubling fact that their national so-called state is located on another people's land. Occasionally, some Israelis tend to forget it, but it doesn't take too long before the Palestinians are there to remind them that this is the case. The Israelis, and definitely the Israeli military, accept by now that there is no military solution to this conflict. And the fact that Israel is becoming more brutal, more murderous, involved in crimes, repeated crimes against humanity, makes the solution of such a conflict more and more difficult or even impossible. And the meaning of it for Israelis with brain is pretty devastating. There is no prospect of future for this Jewish state, which means that the Zionist dream didn't fulfill itself. It turned into a disaster.
Well, what are the different factors playing into this? I mean, is it just politics as usual, or is there a bigger picture?
Yeah, Israel is paralyzed. It is going in 2 days for an election for the third time, and they already talk about the fourth time. And again, it is not because they are divided about politics. They literally agree about everything. Now, if you look at Jewish history, it is quite clear that Jews are quite more effective than anyone else in causing themselves a lot of harm. You know, we can find these kind of stories in the Jewish religious scriptures and so on and so on. And to a certain extent, the deadlock that they're facing now may as well be their karma. And considering the fact that Israel has managed to antagonize the entire region, I don't think that they can enjoy this kind of luxury of being in a political deadlock. They are really speeding against the wall.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Atzman. Israeli-born British novelist, political activist, and writer Gilad Atzman. Next up are news stories from inside Israel. I-24 News. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz said that it was shocking to hear U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders consider moving the U.S. Embassy in occupied Jerusalem, Al-Quds, back to Tel Aviv if elected president. I-24 News. The Israeli regime fears the novel coronavirus may cost it over $4 billion in lost revenue, as 1,600 Israelis are in quarantine. Jerusalem Post. Israeli Minister of War Naftali Bennett swore he would not give 1 inch of land to the Palestinians as he announced the advancement of plans for 1,800 new homes in the occupied West Bank. Haaretz. Top Israeli military brass to be indicted in submarine affair. Avril Bar Yosef, former number 2 at National Security Council, to be indicted for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, pending hearing. Globes. El Al Israel Airlines prepares for immediate plan for laying off 1,000 of the company's 6,300 employees as the coronavirus impacts Tel Aviv's airline industry. And that's what we've discovered from inside Israel. Now, what would you like to add? Go ahead to presstv.com and let us know. From me and the production team, it's goodbye for now.